The smell of cardboard and fresh paint was the scent of freedom. Joyce stood in the middle of her new, modest apartment, surrounded by a chaotic fortress of moving boxes. A weary but triumphant smile touched her lips. She had done it. She had finally escaped. Escaped the suffocating grip of a relationship that had tried to shrink her into someone she didn't recognize. With a sigh that felt like it released years of pent-up anxiety, she walked to the single large window. It didn't overlook a glittering city skyline, but something far better. A small, slightly overgrown patch of green that was all hers. Her own little garden. It was the first place on earth she could truly call her own. A wave of giddy excitement washed over her. She had to tell someone. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she typed a message to her best friend, Sarah. In her haste, fueled by exhaustion and pure joy, she didn't notice that her phone's predictive text had selected the wrong Sarah from her contacts, a number she didn't even recognize, saved from a work event years ago. The message read, "I'm finally here. This is my new home. It's small, but it's mine. Wish me luck." She attached a quick, blurry photo of her view of the little garden and hit send, her heart soaring. Across the city, in a sterile, minimalist penthouse that floated above the clouds like a lonely glass cage, Adrian Remington read the message. He had just endured a 10-hour day of back-to-back meetings where every single person had wanted something from him. His money, his time, his name. He was a commodity, a resource to be mined. He was exhausted, not from the work, but from the crushing weight of his own solitude. Then, his phone chimed with the message from an unknown number. He read the words, simple and vulnerable. He looked at the blurry photo of a small, imperfect garden, and something inside him, a part of him he thought had atrophied long ago, shifted. The message was a tiny, accidental window into a life that felt more real than his own. It was a note of pure, unadulterated hope, sent out into the void. It disarmed him completely. His first instinct, the instinct of a man whose entire life was managed by assistants and firewalls, was to ignore it. To delete it. His second was to reply with a curt, "Wrong number." He did neither. Instead, he felt an impulse he hadn't felt in years. A spark of genuine, unscripted curiosity. He typed the address from the message's metadata into his phone's map. It was in a quiet, unassuming neighborhood he'd never even driven through. The next morning, Adrian Remington sat in his $100,000 car, a simple, beautiful bouquet of wildflowers resting on the passenger seat. He was driving toward a part of the city he had no business being in, toward a woman he had never met, with no logical explanation for his actions. He just knew he had to see the garden for himself. Joyce was wrestling with a particularly stubborn box of books when a firm, polite knock echoed from her front door. She froze. She wasn't expecting anyone. Sarah wasn't due to come over until the weekend, and the landlord had already given her the keys. A flicker of anxiety, a leftover reflex from her old life, went through her. She peeked through the peephole and her confusion only deepened. A man stood on her doorstep. He was tall and impossibly well-dressed for a Tuesday afternoon in her quiet neighborhood, wearing a dark blazer that looked soft and expensive even through the distorted lens. And he was holding flowers. Hesitantly, she opened the door a few inches, leaving the chain on. "Can I help you?" The man offered a small, almost shy smile. His eyes were a startling, intelligent gray. "I hope so," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I think you wished me luck." Joyce stared at him, completely bewildered. "I'm sorry?" He held up his phone, the screen displaying her message from the day before, complete with the little house emoji. "This was you, right?" The realization hit her like a physical blow. A hot wave of mortification washed over her. She had sent her new address, her private little message of hope, to a complete and utter stranger. Her first instinct was to slam the door, to hide from the sheer, cringing embarrassment of it all. But then she looked at him again. There was no judgment in his eyes, no hint of a smirk. There was just a quiet, gentle curiosity, a sort of contained tenderness that was utterly disarming. And instead of slamming the door, she started to laugh. It wasn't a small, polite chuckle. It was a real, genuine, rolling laugh of pure, unadulterated absurdity, a laugh that acknowledged the complete and utter ridiculousness of her life. "Oh my God," she said between gasps of laughter, finally unlatching the chain and opening the door fully. "I cannot believe I did that. I am so sorry. It was a total accident." Her laughter seemed to break a spell in him. The formal politeness in his expression softened into a genuine, captivated smile. "There's no need to apologize," he said, his voice warm. "It was the best message I received all day." He extended the bouquet of wildflowers, a vibrant, unruly mix of daisies, lavender, and cornflowers, her absolute favorites. "I'm Adrian," he said simply, "and these are for your new home." She took the flowers, her fingers brushing against his. A tiny, unexpected spark of electricity shot up her arm. She looked from the beautiful bouquet to his kind, handsome face, and made another impulsive decision. "The least I can do is offer you a coffee as an apology," she said, gesturing into the chaotic sea of boxes that was her living room. "If you're brave enough to enter." "I think I can handle it," he said, that captivating smile widening. He stepped inside, and she closed the door. They sat on upturned moving boxes, drinking instant coffee from mismatched mugs, surrounded by the beautiful, unfinished mess of her new life. The billionaire and the librarian. And as they began to talk, the strangeness of the situation melted away, leaving only the simple, undeniable, and immediate connection between a man and a woman who had found each other by the most unlikely of accidents. The conversation flowed with a startling, unexpected ease. They didn't talk about anything important, and yet it felt like the most important conversation Joyce had had in years. He didn't ask about her past or why she had moved. She didn't ask about his job, and he only offered a vague, "I invest in projects," when she hinted at it. They talked about books and travel and the simple, profound joy of a quiet morning. He had a way of listening that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. He didn't stay long, but the warmth of his presence lingered long after he left, a stark contrast to the cold, lonely silence she had grown accustomed to. 2 days later, he texted her. "You showed me your new home. Now show me your favorite place in the city." The request was simple, direct, and impossible to refuse. She took him on a tour of her world. Not a world of fancy restaurants or exclusive clubs, but a world of quiet, hidden treasures. She led him through the hushed, reverent aisles of the public library where she worked, her voice a happy whisper as she pointed out her favorite first editions. She took him to a dusty second-hand bookshop that smelled of aging paper and forgotten stories. She introduced him to the owner of a tiny tea shop that served the best Earl Grey in the city. Through it all, he was a quiet, attentive observer. He seemed utterly fascinated by the texture of her life, by the passion she had for stories, by the simple, genuine connections she had with the people in her small community. He wasn't just visiting her world, he seemed to be breathing it in, like a man who had been starved of air. They were leaving the tea shop, laughing about a story he'd told, when a familiar voice cut through their easy camaraderie like a shard of ice. "Joyce, fancy seeing you here." Joyce froze. It was Kevin, her ex. He stood on the sidewalk, his arms crossed, a possessive, condescending smirk on his face. He had that look he always got when he felt his ownership was being challenged. "Kevin," she said, her voice tight, all the warmth draining from her face. "What are you doing here?" "Just grabbing a coffee," he lied smoothly, his eyes raking over Adrian with a dismissive, appraising glance. "Who's your new friend? I thought you told me you needed space." "Time to be alone." The implication was clear. "You can't survive without a man, can you?" Joyce felt a familiar wave of shame and anger. She opened her mouth to deliver a sharp retort, to put him in his place. But Adrian was faster. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't square his shoulders. He simply took a half step forward, placing himself ever so slightly between Joyce and her ex. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift, but it changed the entire dynamic of the street. "She's not alone anymore," Adrian said, his voice quiet, yet carrying a tone of absolute, unshakable authority. He gently placed a hand on the small of Joyce's back, a gesture that was both protective and possessive. The warmth of his touch seeped through her sweater, a steadying, grounding force. "Come on, darling," he said, his voice softening as he looked at her, completely dismissing Kevin as if he were nothing more than a piece of litter on the sidewalk. He guided her away, down the street, leaving Kevin standing there, speechless and utterly irrelevant. Joyce's heart was hammering in her chest, a frantic, wild rhythm. It wasn't a rhythm of fear. It was the thunderous, exhilarating beat of being defended, of being protected, of being, for the first time, truly seen. The walk back to her apartment was quiet, but it was a comfortable, charged silence. The ghost of Kevin's smug expression and the quiet, definitive way Adrian had dismissed him hung in the air between them. Adrian's hand was no longer on her back, but she could still feel the phantom warmth of his touch. Inside her small living room, surrounded by the half-unpacked boxes that were slowly starting to resemble a home, she finally broke the silence. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but full of a sincere gratitude that went far beyond the single incident, "for what you did back there. No one's ever done that for me before." "He had no right to speak to you that way," Adrian said simply, his gaze steady. It wasn't a big deal to him. It was just a fact. The connection between them deepened in that moment, a new, more intimate thread weaving itself into the fabric of their unlikely relationship. In the days that followed, they fell into an easy rhythm. They spent a long, lazy Saturday afternoon in a park, sitting on a bench, reading their own books in a comfortable, shared silence that felt more intimate than any conversation. With him, she felt a sense of safety she hadn't realized she was missing. With her, he felt a sense of peace that had been absent from his life for as long as he could remember. It was during that afternoon in the park that she finally worked up the courage to ask. "That first day," she began, her eyes on the pages of her book, not daring to look at him. "When you showed up at my door, you had this look in your eyes, a kind of loneliness." She finally glanced at him. "Why did a stranger's text message make you drive all the way across town with a bouquet of flowers?" The question was gentle, but direct. He was silent for a long moment, watching a group of children play in the distance. The easy, relaxed posture he held beside her tightened almost imperceptibly. "The people in my world," he began, his voice low and thoughtful, "they don't really see me. They see a name, a bank account, a resource. They look at me and they calculate what I can do for them, what they can get from me." He finally turned to look at her, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his calm, collected armor. She saw the profound, weary loneliness of the man in the glass penthouse. "Your message," he continued, a small, sad smile on his lips. "It wasn't asking for anything. It was just real. And being with you, here, in your world. It feels real. It's the first time in a very long time that I feel like someone is seeing me, and not the projects I invest in." His vulnerability was a raw, unguarded thing, and it touched her more deeply than any grand gesture ever could. She understood now. They were both lonely, just in different ways. He was lonely in a crowd. She had been lonely with just one person. He saw the understanding in her eyes, and it gave him a courage he didn't know he possessed. "I don't want to mess this up, Joyce," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. He leaned in, his gaze searching hers, and he kissed her. It was a tender, questioning kiss, a kiss full of all the feelings he didn't know how to say out loud. It was a kiss that tasted of hope and fear, and the beginning of something beautiful and terrifying. As she kissed him back, melting into the warmth and safety of his arms, neither of them wanted to acknowledge the secret that still hung between them like a shadow. The truth of who he really was, and the world of projects and power he would eventually have to return to. The kiss changed the dynamic from a question into a quiet statement. They were no longer just two strangers brought together by a happy accident. They were Adrian and Joyce, two people who were, against all odds, falling for each other. He continued to be a regular, comforting presence in her new life. He would drive out to her small town, leaving his own world behind completely. They would spend their time in her world, governed by her rules. They'd browse the library, take long walks, and cook simple dinners in her small kitchen. He never talked about his work, and she learned not to ask. His life in the city was a black box, and she was, for the moment, content not to look inside. She was happy in their shared bubble, but bubbles, by their very nature, are fragile. One Friday afternoon, Adrian was driving to her apartment when the engine of his sleek, dark gray Aston Martin, a car that was so ridiculously out of place in her town that it might as well have been a spaceship, began to sputter. It died completely on a quiet side street 2 blocks from her home. With a frustrated sigh, he called the local auto shop. A grizzled, friendly mechanic named Gus arrived a few minutes later in a greasy tow truck. As Gus popped the hood, his eyes fell on the watch on Adrian's wrist as he leaned against the car. "Whoa, buddy," Gus said, whistling under his breath. "That's a Patek Philippe, isn't it? The Calatrava." He squinted at Adrian. "My old boss back in the city had one of those. Cost more than my house. You must be somebody important." Adrian's smile was tight, his posture suddenly stiff. "Just a lucky investment," he said smoothly, deflecting the comment. He quickly paid Gus in cash for the tow and the future repair, eager to end the conversation. But Joyce, who had walked over after he'd called to say he was running late, saw the whole exchange. She saw the flicker of discomfort in Adrian's eyes, the way he immediately tried to shut down the conversation. It was a small thing, a tiny discordant note in the beautiful melody they had been composing. But it stuck with her. Later that afternoon, as they were walking through the town square, they passed a newsstand. Joyce's eyes drifted over the rows of magazines and then stopped. Her blood ran cold. On the cover of a glossy business journal, under the headline, "Titans of Tech, the Innovators Shaping Our Future," was a small, professional headshot. The man in the photo was clean-shaven and wearing a severe suit, his expression formidable and intense. It was a world away from the relaxed, kind-faced man standing beside her, but it was, without a single doubt, him. The name printed beneath the photo was Adrian Remington, CEO of Remington Holdings. Joyce stopped walking, her feet suddenly rooted to the pavement. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. She looked from the powerful, intimidating man on the magazine cover to the man standing beside her in a simple, soft sweater. "Adrian." "Remington?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. She held up a trembling finger, pointing at the magazine. She watched as all the color drained from his face. The easy, happy warmth in his eyes was extinguished, replaced by a look of pure, gut-wrenching panic. The bubble had just burst. The walk back to her apartment was a silent, suffocating ordeal. The easy comfort that had existed between them just minutes before had been replaced by a thick, heavy wall of unspoken truth. Adrian kept trying to speak, starting sentences that trailed off into nothing. "Joyce, I can explain. It's not what you think." But the words were hollow, meaningless. As soon as she closed the door to her apartment, she turned away from him, needing space. "I think you should go," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Please," he begged, his voice raw with a desperation she had never heard before. "Just let me talk to you." "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. "Not right now." After he left, the silence in her small apartment was deafening. She sank onto her sofa, her body trembling. With a sense of dread, she opened her laptop and typed his name into the search bar. The results exploded across her screen, a digital tidal wave of a life he had kept completely hidden. Adrian Remington, the elusive billionaire behind the tech empire. Remington Holdings announces record profits. The CEO no one sees. Inside the solitary world of Adrian Remington, article after article detailed his immense wealth, his cutthroat business acumen, his almost pathological need for privacy. There were photos of him at glittering galas, stepping out of private jets, standing on stages in front of thousands of people. It was a life of unimaginable power and privilege, and it was a life he had meticulously, deliberately hidden from her. The pain that lanced through her was sharp and shockingly deep. It wasn't the money. She couldn't care less about the money. It was the lie of a mission. The fact that he had curated a version of himself for her, a simple, quiet man who loved books, all while hiding the truth of his global empire. Her mind, a traitor, immediately flashed to Kevin. To the lies he had told, the ways he had manipulated her, the feeling of being made a fool of. Had she really been so blind as to fall into the same trap again, just on a grander, more spectacular scale? A cold, sickening insecurity washed over her. Had this all been a game to him? A little diversion? Was she just the simple girl from the wrong number? A quaint, amusing pastime for a bored billionaire before he returned to his real life of supermodels and boardrooms? The thought was a humiliation so profound it made her feel physically ill. A knock on the door made her jump. She knew it was him. She opened it to find him standing there, his face etched with panic and regret. The powerful CEO from the magazine cover was gone, replaced by the vulnerable man she had come to know. "Joyce," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Please, just let me explain." She looked at him, her heart a tangled mess of love and betrayal. "Explain what, Adrian?" she asked, her voice cold and brittle, a shield against the pain. "That you were ashamed of me? Or that I was just an exotic little hobby for you to enjoy on your weekends off?" Her words struck him with the force of a physical blow. He flinched, the pain and shock clear on his face. "No," he said, his voice ragged. "Joyce, never. It was never like that." He stepped inside, his desperation so palpable it seemed to suck the air out of the room. "Can I please just talk to you? 5 minutes." She hesitated, then gave a short, bitter nod, stepping back to let him pass. She wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive posture against him, against the fresh wave of hurt his presence caused. "I wanted to tell you," he began, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. "So many times, but I was a coward. I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" she shot back, her voice sharp with disbelief. "The man who runs a multi-billion-dollar empire was afraid of a small-town librarian?" "I was afraid of this," he exclaimed, gesturing around the room, at the space between them, at the wreckage of their trust. "I was afraid of the moment your eyes would change when you looked at me. The moment I would stop being Adrian and start being Adrian Remington. I just wanted something real. For once in my life, I wanted to be sure that someone liked me, the man who loves old books and gets lost on country roads, and not the name, not the money." His explanation, which should have been flattering, felt like an insult. It was the final confirmation of her deepest insecurity. He had been testing her all along. "So you didn't trust me," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. The anger was draining away, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. "From the very beginning, you assumed I would be like everyone else. You assumed the money would matter to me." She took a step closer, the power dynamic shifting. She was no longer the wounded party. She was the prosecutor, and he was the one on trial. "Don't you see the irony, Adrian?" she continued, her voice laced with a sad, cutting wisdom. "For someone so determined to escape the world of money, you're the only one who couldn't see past it. You were so blinded by your own wealth that you couldn't imagine someone else not being blinded by it too. You didn't give me a chance to show you who I was. You judged me before I ever had a chance." The truth of her words landed, dismantling his entire defense. He stared at her, the full weight of his mistake crashing down on him. He had been so focused on protecting his heart from a perceived threat that he had preemptively broken hers. In his fear of being judged, he had committed the greater sin. He had judged her. The fight drained out of him, leaving him looking hollowed out and defeated. "You're right," he whispered, his voice hoarse with regret. "My fear. My own baggage. It made me cynical. I insulted you in the worst possible way, and I am so sorry." The apology was sincere. She could see it in the raw, unguarded pain in his eyes. But sincerity couldn't erase the deceit. "I don't know if I can trust someone who didn't trust me first," she said, the words feeling like stones in her mouth. Her heart was screaming at her to forgive him, to run into his arms, but the wound was too fresh, too deep. She looked away from him, toward the window, at the small garden that had once symbolized her freedom. "I think you should go." He stood there for a long moment, hoping she would change her mind. When she didn't, he turned and walked out the door, the soft click of it closing behind him sounding as final as a gavel. He had everything in the world, but he had just lost the only thing that mattered. And he knew, with a sickening certainty, that this was one loss all his money could never fix. The days that followed were a study in gray. Joyce went through the motions of her life, working at the library, tending to her small garden, unpacking the last of her boxes, but the color had been drained from her world. His absence was a physical ache, a constant low-grade fever of longing and hurt. Adrian, for his part, was adrift. He tried to lose himself in work, but the numbers on the spreadsheets blurred together, meaningless. The silence of his penthouse was no longer a peaceful sanctuary. It was a crushing, suffocating void. He knew he had to give her space, but the fear of losing her completely was a frantic, clawing thing in his chest. He started making excuses to be in her town, a meeting with a local tech startup, a drive to see the autumn foliage. He would park his car streets away and just walk, hoping for a glimpse of her. One crisp afternoon, his desperate hope was answered. He saw her. She was sitting in the window of the town's main coffee shop, the Daily Grind. But she wasn't alone. She was sitting with a man, a handsome, friendly-looking man with kind eyes and an easy smile. They were leaning over a notebook, talking animatedly. Joyce laughed, a bright, beautiful sound that Adrian felt like a punch to the gut. He hadn't heard her laugh like that in weeks. The man was David, a local author and a regular at Joyce's library. He had asked her to meet for coffee to discuss his new book, hoping she might help with some historical research. He was also, quite clearly, smitten with her. Adrian stood across the street, a cold, unfamiliar fire igniting in his veins. It was jealousy, raw and ugly and powerful. He despised the feeling, despised the weakness it implied, but he was helpless against it. He saw the way David looked at her, the way she smiled back at him, and a possessive, irrational rage washed over him. He didn't think. He just acted. He strode across the street and pushed open the door to the coffee shop, the little bell above it chiming his unwelcome arrival. He walked directly to their table, his presence immediately sucking all the warmth and easy laughter out of their conversation. "Joyce," he said, his voice tight and clipped. "I need to speak with you. It's urgent." Joyce looked up, her expression a mixture of shock and annoyance. David looked between the two of them, his friendly smile faltering. "I'm in a meeting, Adrian," she said, her tone cool and professional. "I don't care," he bit out, his eyes flicking to David with a look of pure, undisguised animosity. "This can't wait." The possessiveness in his tone was a slap. It was the same controlling behavior she had run from with Kevin. He wasn't acting like a man trying to earn back her trust. He was acting like a man staking a claim. The shock on Joyce's face hardened into a cold, quiet fury. She saw in that single, arrogant moment that he still didn't understand. He thought he could command her attention, interrupt her life, simply because he wanted to. The jealousy, which he had intended as a desperate gesture to show how much he cared, had backfired spectacularly. It had only served to prove her deepest fear, that at his core, he was just another powerful man who believed the world and everyone in it should bend to his will. The silence at the small coffee shop table was thick enough to cut with a knife. David, the author, looked between Adrian's thunderous expression and Joyce's furious one, and quickly gathered his things. We can continue this another time, he said to Joyce, giving her a concerned look before making a hasty exit. Now they were alone, the object of Adrian's jealousy gone. But the damage was done. How dare you, Joyce said, her voice a low, trembling whisper of pure rage. How dare you come in here and do that? You act exactly like him, like Kevin. You think you can just show up and command my attention because you feel threatened? Her words, comparing him to her controlling ex, were a dagger to his heart. He visibly recoiled, the anger draining out of him, replaced by a wave of shame so profound it made him feel dizzy. She was right. He had acted like a possessive fool. He sank into the chair David had just vacated, the fight completely gone from him. You're right, he said, his voice rough with self-loathing. I was jealous, and I acted like a child. I'm sorry. He finally looked at her, his eyes pleading. I saw you laughing with him, and I panicked. The thought of losing you for good. Your panic doesn't give you the right to control me, she shot back, though his raw, honest confession had taken some of the wind out of her sails. I know, he said quietly. I know words aren't enough anymore. I need to show you. I need to prove that I trust you, and that I'm not that person. He fell silent, his mind racing. He had to do something. Not a gift. Not an apology. A gesture. A grand, meaningful gesture that proved he had listened, that he understood. He thought about their conversations, about her dreams, about the little cafe bookstore she had mentioned in passing, the one she wanted to open someday. He had an idea. It was insane. It was impulsive. It was perfect. The next day, he didn't text or call. He just showed up at her apartment. When she opened the door, her expression wary, he simply handed her a large, official-looking envelope. What is this? She asked, her voice suspicious. An apology, he said. She opened it. Inside was the deed to a building. The old abandoned clock tower building in the center of her town square. A beautiful, historic, and completely derelict property that had been for sale for years. The deed had been transferred into one name, Joyce Turner. She stared at the document, then back at him, her face a mask of disbelief. What? What did you do? I can't accept this, Adrian. This is insane. I know, he said, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. And you don't have to accept it as a gift. Don't think of it as me giving you something. Think of it as a challenge, a wager. He took a step back, giving her space, his eyes earnest and sincere. I'm not offering you a shortcut, Joyce. I'm offering you a starting line. The building is just bricks and mortar. It's empty. It needs a soul. It needs a dream. I'm betting that you have the courage, the vision, and the strength to turn that into the bookstore you've always wanted. He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. Prove me right. Prove to yourself, and to everyone who ever doubted you, that you can build your own damn dream from the ground up. It was a gesture of immense wealth, yes, but it was framed as an act of immense faith. He wasn't giving her a finished product. He was giving her a broken, beautiful, potential-filled beginning. He was giving her a challenge he knew she was more than capable of meeting. It wasn't a handout. It was a dare. And it left her completely, utterly speechless. Joyce stood in her small living room, the deed clutched in her hand, the paper feeling impossibly heavy. The old clock tower building. It was the heart of their town, a landmark everyone lamented was falling into ruin. The idea of bringing it back to life, of filling it with books and light and the smell of coffee. It was a dream so big she had never even dared to voice it out loud. And he had just handed it to her. This is manipulation, you know, she said, her voice quiet. But the accusation lacked its earlier fire. Is it? He countered gently. Or is it faith? I'm not asking for anything in return, Joyce. The building is yours. You can sell it tomorrow and never speak to me again. But I don't think you will. I think you're a builder. I'm just giving you something to build with. His words hit their mark. He wasn't trying to buy her forgiveness. He was challenging her to be the person he already saw. After a long, silent battle with her own pride and fear, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She accepted the challenge. The reality, however, set in quickly. The building was a beautiful shell, but it needed everything: new plumbing, updated electrical, structural repairs. And then there was the cost of inventory, equipment, and staffing. Joyce spent her nights hunched over her laptop, drafting a business plan, the numbers growing into a terrifying, insurmountable mountain. The deed was a starting line, but the finish line was on the other side of a financial chasm. Armed with her meticulously crafted plan, she walked into the local bank. The loan officer, a man named Mr. Peterson, was polite, but deeply condescending. He looked at her application: librarian, single, no collateral other than a recently gifted derelict building, and his smile tightened. "It's a lovely idea, Ms. Turner," he said, his tone patronizing. "A real credit to the community. But the numbers just aren't there. The risk is far too high. I'm afraid the bank can't help you." The rejection was a cold, hard slap of reality. Dejected, she was gathering her papers when the door to the small office opened. It was Adrian. He didn't even glance at the loan officer. He walked directly to the chair beside Joyce and sat down, his presence instantly changing the atmosphere in the room from one of dismissal to one of high-stakes importance. "I apologize for the interruption," he said calmly, his voice smooth as steel. "I'm here regarding Ms. Turner's business loan application." Mr. Peterson's eyes widened as he finally recognized the man from the business journals. Mr. Remington, I didn't realize you were involved." "I'm not," Adrian said coolly. "This is Ms. Turner's project entirely. However," he continued, his gaze unwavering, "I am here to offer my services as a co-signer and personal guarantor for the loan." He then turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting Peterson's. "And my legal team at Remington Holdings will be happy to review the loan agreement to ensure the terms offered are fair and equitable for a promising new local business such as this one." The threat was veiled, but unmistakable. He wasn't offering to pay for it. He was offering to stand beside her. He was using his immense power not to save her, but to force the world to take her seriously. He was leveraging his empire to ensure she got a fair fight. Mr. Peterson, who was now sweating profusely, began shuffling papers with a newfound urgency. "Of course, Mr. Remington. I believe we may have been too hasty. Let me just reevaluate these projections." Joyce sat in stunned silence, watching the scene unfold. He wasn't her savior. He was her partner, her enforcer, her champion. And in that moment, she realized that this was what it looked like when a man like Adrian Remington truly fought for you. Not with money, but with the full, terrifying, and magnificent weight of his name. With the loan approved, on remarkably favorable terms, the real work began. The old clock tower building, which had been silent for a decade, came to life with the sounds of construction. Joyce threw herself into the project with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed. She was no longer just a librarian. She was a project manager, a designer, an entrepreneur. She spent her days managing contractors, her evenings choosing paint colors and light fixtures, and her nights poring over book catalogs. It was exhausting, terrifying, and the most exhilarating thing she had ever done. And through it all, Adrian was her silent, steady partner. He kept his promise. He never interfered, never offered his opinion unless asked. But he was always there. He would drive out from the city on weekends, not in one of his tailored suits, but in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt. He would show up with coffee and donuts for the construction crew. He would spend hours helping her, not with business advice, but with the actual physical labor. He learned how to spackle drywall. He helped her sand and refinish the original hardwood floors. He spent an entire Saturday on a ladder, carefully cleaning the face of the old clock, his brow furrowed in concentration. He reveled in the simple, satisfying work, in the feeling of sawdust on his hands, and the honest ache in his muscles at the end of the day. In building her dream, they were inadvertently rebuilding their own connection. The tension and mistrust were sanded away like old varnish, revealing the strong, beautiful grain of their affection beneath. She saw a side of him that no one else in the world got to see. The patient, hard-working, surprisingly funny man who was completely out of his element and utterly, deeply happy. He, in turn, saw her come alive. He watched her command a room full of burly contractors, her quiet authority leaving no room for argument. He saw her passion, her vision, her unwavering determination. He was falling in love all over again, not with the quiet librarian he had met by chance, but with the powerful, capable force of nature she was becoming. One afternoon, as they were covered in a fine layer of plaster dust, laughing as they tried to assemble a particularly complicated bookshelf, Kevin appeared in the open doorway. Her ex stood there, taking in the scene, a look of pure, baffled disbelief on his face. "Seriously, Joyce?" he sneered, his voice echoing in the cavernous, half-finished space. "You're playing house? You really think a guy like that," he gestured dismissively at Adrian, "is going to stick around? He's just having a little fun, playing handyman in the countryside before he goes back to his real world of supermodels and boardrooms." The words were meant to be a poison dart, designed to hit her deepest insecurity. Before Joyce could even react, Adrian, who had overheard every word, slowly put down his screwdriver. He wiped his dusty hands on his jeans and walked toward Kevin, his movements calm and deliberate. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. He stopped in front of Kevin and placed a protective arm around Joyce's shoulders, pulling her close. "You've got it all wrong," Adrian said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a profound revelation. He looked from Kevin's smug face to Joyce's worried one, and then around at the beautiful, chaotic mess they were building together. "I'm not visiting her world," he said, his gaze locking with Kevin's, his voice filled with a raw, humble sincerity that shocked them both. "I'm desperately trying to become a part of it." The public, heartfelt confession left Kevin speechless. But more importantly, it left Joyce breathless, the last of her doubts and fears dissolving in the face of his simple, powerful, and undeniable truth. The night of the grand opening was pure magic. Wildflower Books and Cafe was no longer a dusty, derelict building. It was the living, breathing heart of the town. The old clock tower had been restored, its hands ticking once more. Inside, the space was warm and inviting, filled with the scent of old paper, fresh coffee, and the low, happy hum of a crowd that had come out in droves to support their newest, most beloved local business. Joyce was a whirlwind of motion and light. She moved through the space she had created, her face glowing, greeting old friends, recommending books, and beaming with a pride so profound it was almost overwhelming. This was her. Every shelf, every book, every warm, welcoming corner was a testament to her strength and her vision. Adrian, true to his word, stayed in the background. He wasn't the billionaire benefactor or the silent partner. He was just Joyce's boyfriend, a proud, supportive presence in the corner of the room. He watched her shine, his heart swelling with a love and admiration so immense it almost hurt. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this was her world. He was just a lucky, grateful guest. Late in the evening, as the initial rush began to subside, Joyce's best friend, Sarah, cornered Adrian by the poetry section. "She's incredible, isn't she?" Sarah said, a proud, knowing smile on her face. "She's everything," Adrian replied, his eyes never leaving Joyce. Sarah's smile softened. "You know she's terrified, right?" Adrian's head snapped toward her, his expression confused. "Terrified? Of what? Look at this place. She's a massive success." "She's not afraid of failing, Adrian," Sarah said gently, her voice dropping so only he could hear. "She's afraid of you leaving." The words hit him with an unexpected force. "Leaving? Why would I leave?" "Because the project is done," Sarah explained patiently. "The cafe is open. The dream is built. In her mind, the reason for you to be here, in her world, is gone. She's falling completely in love with you, but she's terrified that now that the fun is over, you'll get bored and retreat back to your real life, leaving her with this beautiful, painful reminder of you." The revelation struck Adrian with the force of a physical blow. He had been so focused on proving his trust, on empowering her, that he hadn't realized her deepest insecurity remained. The fear that she was just a temporary stop in his life, not the destination. He had to show her, once and for all, that her world wasn't a place he was visiting. It was the place he wanted to call home. He saw the small, makeshift stage at the front of the cafe where a local musician had been playing earlier. An idea, bold and public and terrifying, formed in his mind. He walked to the stage, his heart pounding. He picked up the microphone. "Excuse me, everyone," he said, his voice amplified through the speakers, causing the remaining conversations to die down. "Could I have your attention for just a moment? My name is Adrian, and I'd like to say a few words." Every eye in the room turned to him. Joyce looked up from across the cafe, her face a mask of surprise and apprehension, her heart in her throat. She had no idea what he was about to do. A hush fell over the cafe. Every person in the room, from Joyce's oldest friends to the town mayor, turned to look at the handsome, mysterious man on the stage. Joyce stood frozen behind the counter, her hands gripping the smooth, cool wood, her heart hammering against her ribs. Adrian took a deep breath, his eyes finding hers across the crowded room, holding her gaze as if they were the only two people there. "Most of you don't know me," he began, his voice steady and clear, resonating with a quiet sincerity. "And those of you who might, probably know me by a name in a business journal or as the head of a company in the city. You know me for the world I was born into." He paused, letting his eyes drift around the beautiful, warm space Joyce had created. "But over the last few months," he continued, his voice softening, "I've learned that success isn't about the height of your buildings or the numbers on a balance sheet. It's about building something that matters, something with a soul. And no one has taught me that more profoundly than Joyce." He looked directly at her now, his heart in his eyes, a public declaration unfolding. "I didn't help Joyce build this place," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he made no attempt to hide. "The truth is, this place, and the incredible woman who poured her heart and soul into it, built me back. It reminded me what it feels like to be a part of a community. It reminded me what it feels like to be real." He then announced the first major initiative of his company's newly formed philanthropic foundation. A multi-million-dollar grant program dedicated to funding and mentoring small-town entrepreneurs who have a dream of revitalizing their communities. "This program," he announced, "was inspired by the vision of one person, and I can think of no one better to sit on its board and help us find other dreamers like her than Joyce Turner herself." A wave of gasps and murmurs went through the crowd. He wasn't just praising her, he was elevating her, making her a leader, a partner in his own world, on her own terms. He set the microphone down and walked off the stage, moving through the stunned, silent crowd directly toward her. He didn't stop until he was standing in front of her, the bustling cafe fading into the background. "I don't want to be a visitor in your world anymore, Joyce," he whispered, his voice for her alone, his gaze intense and full of a deep, unwavering love. "I want to live in it, with you." The public speech had been for the town, for the world to legitimize her. But this final whispered declaration was just for her. It was the ultimate answer to her deepest, most unspoken fear, and it left her completely, utterly breathless. Life found a new, beautiful normal. Adrian was true to his word. He didn't just visit her world, he began to build a life in it. He bought a small, unassuming house on the edge of town, one with a garden of its own next to a quiet stream. He still ran his empire, but he did it more and more from the small office he set up in his new home, proving that his center of gravity had shifted permanently. Joyce, in turn, flourished. She ran her cafe with a joyful confidence and poured her heart into the new foundation, her insights and empathy making it an immediate success. The line between his world and her world blurred until it was simply, beautifully, their world. One perfect golden afternoon in late spring, he told her he was taking her on a picnic. He drove them out of town, to a place she had never been, a rolling meadow blanketed in the same kind of vibrant, unruly wildflowers he had brought to her door on that first fateful day. They sat on a soft blanket, surrounded by the quiet hum of bees and the gentle rustle of the wind. They were relaxed, happy, their shoulders touching, a comfortable, easy silence between them. This, Joyce thought, was the purest form of happiness she had ever known. After a while, Adrian reached into the picnic basket and pulled out not a bottle of wine, but a small, antique-looking book. It was bound in soft, worn leather, with no title on the cover. "I found something I thought you might like," he said, his eyes sparkling with a secret. She took the book, her librarian's hands appreciating the feel of the old leather. It felt ancient, important. She opened it. The pages were thick, creamy, and completely blank, except for the very first page. Written on it, in Adrian's sharp, elegant handwriting, were just 6 words. Chapter 1. The Day I Met You. Joyce looked up from the page, her heart catching in her throat, her eyes wide and questioning. He was already moving, shifting from his relaxed position beside her onto one knee in the soft flower-strewn grass. "I have spent my entire life reading, collecting, and investing in other people's stories," he began, his voice low and thick with an emotion that made her own eyes well up. "But the only story I want to write, from now until my very last day, is ours." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple velvet box. He opened it to reveal a delicate, vintage-style ring, a single clear diamond that sparkled in the afternoon sun. "Joyce Turner," he said, his voice trembling ever so slightly. "My best friend, my partner, my favorite story. Will you marry me and help me fill the rest of these pages?" 2 years had passed since the day a stranger showed up on Joyce's doorstep with a bouquet of wildflowers. The Wildflower Books and Cafe was no longer a new venture. It was an institution, the undeniable heart of the town. The old clock tower chimed the hours, a steady, reliable heartbeat for the community Joyce had revitalized. On this particular sun-drenched Saturday, the cafe was alive. Joyce, now 6 months pregnant and glowing with a serene, happy confidence, moved through the tables, not as a frantic owner, but as a gracious host. She knew everyone by name, from the mayor who held his weekly informal meetings in a corner armchair, to the group of teenagers who debated fantasy novels by the window. Adrian arrived just after the lunch rush, sliding into his usual seat. He was no longer a visitor. He was a local. He had traded his penthouse for the house by the stream, his tailored suits for soft spun sweaters, and his board meetings for video calls taken from his quiet home office. He hadn't abandoned his empire. He had simply bent its orbit to revolve around a new sun. He watched his wife, a manuscript for his company's new Discovery imprint, the one Joyce helped create, resting forgotten in his lap. He saw her recommend a book to an elderly woman, her face lighting up as she described the plot. He saw her share a laugh with Sarah, who was helping out behind the counter. He saw the easy way she rested a hand on her growing belly, a gesture of unconscious, maternal love. Later that evening, after the last customer had gone and the closed sign was hung on the door, they sat together in the quiet, darkened cafe. The only light came from a single reading lamp, casting a warm, golden glow over the two of them. "I had a call with David today," Joyce said, her feet propped up on a stool, her head resting on Adrian's shoulder. "His book is being published. By us. He said to thank you." "He should thank you," Adrian murmured, his arm wrapped securely around her. "You were the one who saw the potential in his early drafts. You were the one who gave him the platform." She counted softly. They had fallen into this easy rhythm, a partnership that extended into every corner of their lives. He smiled, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Speaking of platforms, I also had a call today from Kevin." Joyce tensed slightly. She hadn't seen or heard from her ex since the day he'd shown up at the construction site. "What did he want?" she asked, her voice neutral. "He wanted a job," Adrian said, a note of disbelief in his voice. "His company went under. He was surprisingly humble. Said he'd been following the Foundation's work and was impressed. He asked if there was an entry-level opening. "And what did you say?" Joyce asked, sitting up to look at him. "I told him we weren't hiring," Adrian said simply. "But I also had HR send him a link to the small business grant application. I told him if he had a good idea, he should apply, just like anyone else." He looked at her, his expression serious. "I told him the board, which you chair, makes all the final decisions. His future is, quite literally, in your hands." Joyce stared at him, a slow smile spreading across her face. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of profound, ultimate closure. It was a testament to how far she had come, from the woman who ran to the woman who now held the power to grant second chances. "That," she said, "was very well played, Mr. Remington." "I learned from the best, Mrs. Remington," he replied, his eyes twinkling. He stood and pulled her gently to her feet, his hands coming to rest on her belly, where a soft kick fluttered against his palm. His breath hitched, his expression softening into one of pure, unadulterated awe. "Our next chapter is getting impatient," he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. "She has her mother's spirit." Joyce laughed softly. He looked around the quiet, beautiful bookstore, at the rows of silent stories waiting to be read. He looked at his wife, the hero of his own favorite story. He looked at the life they had built, a life born from a single, accidental text message. "I used to think my life was a finished book," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A lonely story with a predictable, empty ending." He pulled her closer, his heart overflowing. "You didn't just give me a new chapter, Joyce. You gave me a whole new book, and I can't wait to see how we write the rest of it." She wrapped her arms around his neck, her heart full and at peace. "Whatever it is," she whispered, "I know it will have a happy ending." And as they stood together in the heart of their dream, they knew it already had.